Welcome back to another episode of What the L. I'm your host, Elle Kramer, and today I have a very special treat for you guys. My dear friend, Bridget Mouton. She is the CEO of Bridgewell Integrative Nursing, and as a registered nurse, neurodevelopmental care specialist, and doula, Bridget brings a wealth of experience in guiding individuals through their healing journeys, particularly in understanding and addressing trauma's impacts on our lives. And so today we're going to just talk about her expertise and her insights into trauma and self-care and the intentional practices that she is gifted in. And yeah, I'm so excited for you to be here today. Thank you for coming on.
I do it with you.
Yeah, and we only have one mic today, so we'll just be super close today and it's going to be good. But yeah.
That's so fun. It will be good because we are called to be close and in community, and that's our natural human community. So, yeah, it's going to be great to sit with you and chat a little bit about how trauma affects us and what are some things we can do to move past our trauma.
Yeah. So, can you share some highlights that led up to the journey of your position as a CEO of your company or the integrative and Bridgewell Integrative Nursing?
Yeah, sure. So I stumbled upon Dr. Maskatova's neurosensory motor reflex integration many years ago when my oldest child was in high school. She actually got to a point where she really, really needed additional support. And her pediatrician and her therapist were kind of like at a loss. Like, okay, what are we going to do? And I just didn't want to keep playing like mix and match with her medicine. So I went to a homeschool little convention and I met these great ladies from Grand Coteau who shared a little bit about Dr. Maskatova's work with me. I immediately took them home and began working with those specific movement patterns. And we saw such a big change. My oldest child is super social, always into everything. She was a cheerleader. She was in speech and debate. She always had to work harder in school just because she was always juggling so many things. But we didn't think anything of it because we all work hard in our house. So we didn't even think twice. We're like, oh, this is just the way it is, right? Lo and behold, through working with Dr. Maskatova, we realized that, oh, maybe our whole house is neurodivergent. Genetics is real, right? And so we got her the support she needed, and she was able to go off to college. She ended up getting a great scholarship when she had begun to struggle so much that she didn't even want to go to school.
Wow.
Right? Like, so her grades plummeted. We ended up homeschooling the last couple of years. And because of this work and the work around her traumas, both genetic and epigenetic, I just saw her blossom. And we did the same for me, for my littles, for my husband. And we've all just seen the benefits. And that's how I ended up starting my own little private practice because Dr. Maskatova's work just really changed our lives and the way we see the world.
Can you elaborate a little bit on his work more?
Sure. Dr. Svetlana Maskatova developed MNRI, the neurosensory motor reflex integration, after doing trauma work after a huge train accident in Poland. People were dying of shock, and she went in and she used some techniques that were active to help people come out of shock. All of a sudden, their bodies began to heal, their minds began to heal. And from that point on, she began to replicate the very same things in her private work. So she's been in the United States for about 30 years now. The Maskatova Institute is in Orlando, Florida. And we actually do a lot of work with learning differences. We've got a lot of work with the autistic community. But really, MNRI is a lifespan approach. So not only do we focus on trauma, but we just focus on health and wellness overall. And so that's kind of how she came to the United States and began to share this gift with us.
So, can you give me your definition of trauma and so how do you use that within your life to heal your own traumas?
Sure. So, one of the things I think is super important to recognize is that trauma isn't always drama, right? Like, it's not always something like super crazy that happened. Like, it's not going to always be a terrible train accident in Poland.
Right.
It's not going to always be your house burning down, or a car accident. Trauma can be anything that the body receives as a major stressor, depending on the foundation of each unique system. So each organism has unique abilities and skills, right? Like,
Right.
we're all genetically coded as these great, amazing humans. We're all winners because we're here and now, but we've got downloads from our parents, right? And depending on how our environment is set up, we might receive, like, if someone ran into this space right now, I might receive that as traumatic, but maybe you wouldn't, right? Like, depending on where we are in our process of healing. And so I think it's super important to remember that trauma can be something that is a genetic download,
Right.
or it can be environmental. And when we talk about how to move forward and how to kind of, I don't want to say embrace trauma, but boy, to use it as like a trampoline for greater healing and stress resilience, we really have to recognize that it's not always this big catastrophic event. Sometimes it can be that, I don't know, a pretty vase broke
Yeah.
and like your day crumbles, like there's always something underneath it.
I think what you said about how it's not always like this big thing and it can just be a genetic underlying trait from your parents is so true, because I feel like both of my parents are very overthinkers, you could say, like very, yeah, they both have anxiety, and so they pass that gene down to me. So I feel like I'm an anxiety hybrid, and
I like that.
I just feel like it created me to just be like so have to be so mindful of that, and having to try to like reframe my mind from constantly thinking in such a negative way. And can you go into more detail about how it can just be it can be anything. It doesn't have to be something necessarily like traumatic.
Yeah. So for sure, we can definitely jump into that a little bit more, and let's talk about it in terms of like what it might look like for
Yeah.
someone, right? Because I would say both my husband and I are, pretty little anxious souls, right? And I come off as super chill because I need everything to be settled in peace. And he's a high achieving, high performing professional.
Right.
And so it just looks so different on us. And as we watch our kids grow and develop, we totally see the same thing, that we both have our own anxieties that we pass down to the children, but it looks very, very different on each body. So something like, well, we could kind of talk about the cherry blossom thing.
Do it.
It's cool.
Yeah.
So I share this with everyone. That's why I'm like, hey, let's talk about it. But there's this study where these rats were exposed to a scent, and the scent ended up being noxious, right? And so many rats suffered this from being exposed to the cherry blossom, right? It was super traumatic. Well, years down the road, great great grandchildren of these rats have the same like noxious experience, and they were never exposed to cherry blossom before. So it was literally passed down from generations. Same thing with our bodies, with something like anxiety, but it doesn't always have to just be anxiety. Like, this is the same with any neurodivergence, right? Because we know through Dr. Maskatova's work that any primitive reflex pattern that is not well supported, is not integrated, is going to become somewhat problematic at some point. So, like, I've got one kid who's like high performing, super like overachiever, and I've got one kid who's like just is like, okay, this is ridiculous. I can't do this anymore. Like, just so done with the world, right? So you see both ends of the spectrum because both parents had an issue with what we call the Moro reflex, where I didn't have proper bonding after I was born. So, like, that was a setup for me to have issues with anxiety. And that is very common with anyone who has, like, I was adopted. So, anyone who had, like, a birth in the hospital. Like, if you were born in the hospital, then you might need some reflex integration, because one of the things we know through the Institute is that over 98% of hospital births have been augmented in some way.
Really?
Maybe they didn't turn completely. Maybe they got an epidural. Maybe baby didn't have enough time to shimmy down the birth canal. All of those things really affect how we show up in the world. And so that is literally passed down from generation to generation. C-sections can suffer some of the same effects.
I did not know that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's super cool to think about, like, how we were designed to come into the world. And because we have all these beautiful life-saving technologies, they sometimes get in the way.
Right. So how can I use these not these facets? How can I use those techniques that you described in my everyday life if I wasn't just like a regular client of yours?
Sure. So there are specific movement patterns that you can use that are on the Maskatova website that you can go to YouTube and use. The stress resilience protocols are the trauma recovery protocols. These are free resources that anyone can access at any time. Those are two of my favorites that Dr. Maskatova has gifted the world with. So those are intentional movements that will allow your body to begin to support the patterns that your body's kind of stuck in.
So what is like an example of one of those movements?
So the Moro reflex pattern, it's a cross-lateral movement and a full extension of the opposite limbs. That one is very helpful for anxiety. And there are things like embrace squeeze, which is just a gentle squeeze touch from the fingertips up to the shoulders and from the feet all the way up to the hips. Those things can really start what we call neuromodulation, which allows us to balance the chemicals inside our body that allows us to modulate on our own. And that's super important to talk about because so many times we like need the additional support and we'll use a medication or a substance or a risky behavior or the big one, scrolling for a hit of dopamine, right?
Right.
When we can support our body in a way that we can do it for ourselves.
So how would we do that for ourselves if we like what's a way that I could do that for myself if I'm like struggling with anxiety?
Sure. So you could use the Moro movement. You could use embrace squeeze. You can use fingers pyramid. Fingers pyramid is the movement from the very tip of the finger, moving in, out, and inching forward up the fingers all the way to the knuckles and pulling off with the intensity of the emotion that you feel. What that does is that moves the energy of the nervous system from the back brain, from the brainstem, all the way back up into that frontal processing area, which then allows you to make a better choice.
Really?
Right? Like, it allows your body to release and not struggle as much with like impulse control.
Right. So I think so. Okay, so something that I have always been very aware of is how where we store trauma in our body is very significant. And how do we release that? Why is it stored in those certain areas? And yeah, can you just tell me about that?
Yeah, for sure. So, depending on which reflex patterns need the most support, is where you will store it in your body. So, some people, this is like one of the hot topics in trauma work right now, will store it in their eyes, which will cause it to be very difficult to read a book. It might be very difficult to pay attention. It might cause visual acuity issues. and the eyes may not work together anymore,
Hmm.
which is the root of many people who have issues with like attention deficit or hyperactivity because their eyes don't work together. So like their body's in the state of hypervigilance all the time, which really causes cortisol to be super high, which in turn damages our organs over time.
Does it?
Does.
Oh, okay.
So, like, when we talk about how important it is to support a neurodivergent body, that's why, because anyone who has to walk around compensating all the time is under more stress. So, that is kind of where the trauma will be stored in the body, depending on where the weaknesses are in the system.
So basically what you're saying is if I'm walking around with anxiety, I'm overcompensating and making my life harder than it needs to be.
So, not exactly. And I want to reframe it because walking around with anxiety, you are not doing anything to yourself, right? This is sort of how you came into the world. And if we can use that anxiety and harness it in a more positive way, then your body won't receive it as a stressor, right? So, what's super important is to remember that you didn't do anything wrong, right? Like, you don't go around saying, hey, me, choose me for anxiety. Like, nobody does that. That's ridiculous.
Right.
No one would choose that, right? But it does feel like that. Like, oh, I'm making my life so much harder because it's a stupid anxiety. But really, you are simply living your life, and all of these things are coming at you at one time, and your body is wanting to survive. It's wanting to keep you alive. That's one of my favorite things to tell people is that you survived this. Thank you, body, for keeping me alive. Because if you didn't have that state of hypervigilance, you would not be here. Right? Like if it was not a thing, then you wouldn't have made it here. You know, you wouldn't have made it up to this point if it hadn't kept you alive.
Right.
So because that's kind of part of how like natural selection and like how we evolve over time as humans, like there's a purpose for that anxiety. That's why it's still in the human system.
So you're saying that like you can use your anxiety to be a positive.
Exactly.
And so how do you do that within your own life?
So I am a master procrastinator. Procrastination is literally my motivation many, many times. And I'm so anxious to get it right and to do my very best many times that like, I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to do it. I have to do it. And then I'm like, I wear myself out.
Right.
Like worrying about, I have to do it. I have to do it. And I really haven't done anything but plan these things in my mind so many times. I'm going over the script again and again and again. And like, I'm so exhausted.
Yeah.
And then it comes
Like before
to
even doing the task, you're exhausted.
Exactly. And so then like you do it and you do it really well, right? Because that's who you are, Elle. You are just really good at stuff. And so like then you
Except
have
technology.
Oh yeah, well,
My one microphone.
sis. Technology may be the devil. I'm just saying.
I agree.
That's not good. It's not good. I'm terrible with it too. But like then you get this like positive affirmation because you really rocked it, and people are like, oh my gosh, how'd you do that? And you're like, oh, if you only knew the stress I was.
Yeah, if you only knew all of the stuff, like every single factor that went into this.
Oh my goodness. That is so true. And then you like there's a cycle, right? Because oh my gosh, I didn't even like do it ahead of time.
Yeah.
And it still came out good. And people really like it. So maybe I'll do it again. And the truth of the matter is that yes, you can do things that way. And yes, it will work out really well. But over time, your organ systems will suffer. So, like the first time I submitted an assignment without like freaking out and like doing a little bit at a time instead of like, you know, staying up for 24 hours preparing for it when I could just do like 20 minutes here and 20 minutes there and like be super chill. And it was really, really good. Like, really good. Like, as in to be published good,
Mhm.
right? I was like, oh, wait a minute. This works,
Yeah.
right? So then you have like this confirmation bias that keeps happening because if I do a little bit at a time and I prepare, then my body isn't stressed. Then my brain isn't stressed. I'm not working out of survival. Well, dang, I'm really creative. Oh man, I'm really, really smart. And like you keep getting these instances and your body wants them again. You keep getting these hits of dopamine, right? It's almost as good as scrolling.
But better.
But better because it might translate to a career.
Yeah. And so how do you like get that mindset to be an everyday
An everyday thing.
mindset?
Repetition, repetition, repetition. So the boring stuff, you just do it. And you do it, and you do it, and you do it, and you do it until your body recognizes the new pattern as safe. Right? So like if someone's wanting to get into the habit of exercising, right? Like you and I have talked about that plenty of times. Like I don't love to run. Like I'm a terrible runner. I don't like it. I love the way it feels after. I love knowing that I completed the task. I love the endorphin high after. I even like the way it feels when my muscles are sore.
Yeah, me too.
I hate it in the process. Wish I just applied that to the rest of my life. You know?
So smart.
No, it's called I screwed it up plenty of times. And then I met Dr. Mascatova and she confirmed that this is accurate. This is the way we were designed, right? That we need repetitions in the right intensity, the right timing, the right direction, the proper pattern so that our bodies can learn. We don't learn when we are under stress. You ever think like, oh my gosh, why do I keep doing these same silly things that really like break my heart again and again and again? Well, your body's in survival. It's in deep protection, so you cannot learn, right? So like say someone, oh, this is good for like college age kids. Okay, say someone's like, man, every time I go out with my friends, I drink too much, I make out with stupid people, and it's super problematic, right? Like this might have been my friend's boyfriend or something. You know, I don't know. I'm like making up a dramatic story. And it keeps happening again and again and again. Well, the key consciously is to recognize like why do you need to drink too much? Like what is that? What are you numbing? What are you hiding? And then to unravel it and to do it in your body, right? People who kind of follow the same compulsive patterns that can really lead to super risky behavior, they usually are stuck in a cycle related to the Babkin pattern. And the Babkin pattern is where obsessive compulsive thoughts, rumination, addictions, and attachment live. And so say maybe this young girl had daddy issues. Right? Daddy was emotionally unavailable. Well, that might mean that she's like super sad about it. She might drink too much. She might make out with her friend's boyfriend again and again and again. Like something crazy like that. You know, like I don't know. Like that could be a scenario. To unravel this pattern, one must look underneath and to look in a place that's super safe, right? Like I always say like therapy and self-care has to be done in the right timing and the right environment, right? Like if you're trying to live this healthy lifestyle, but you're living with super toxic roommates, this is probably not the right time to do it because the place isn't safe,
Right.
right? Like if mom and dad are going through like a really tough divorce, like they're really nasty, and you want to take care of yourself as a young person, you probably shouldn't do it in the middle of that. You should probably like go into a status quo and just take care of your body. Be simple, keep it simple, get over the hump, and then revisit the issues there. Or better yet, tell them to get a grip. Better yet,
Move out.
move out. I like that one.
Yeah.
I like that's a good solution.
So what kind of do you know like I feel like you know about like the attachments, like certain types of attachments. Can you like touch upon those?
So let's talk about like my attachment stuff because that'll be the easiest way for us to jump into it. So I'm an adopted kid, and that my primary attachment didn't really happen. My mom was a sick mama. She wasn't able to give me that first sense of bonding, right? My parents that raised me and loved me were amazing, right? But boy, when I hit puberty, whew, all of my attachment issues popped up. Like all of a sudden, like you swear that I was raised by wolves. Like really, my mom would tell people like, we don't know what happened. Well, that initial bonding didn't happen. So my attachment was just reactive. It was very reactive. So my picker was broken. Like I didn't choose friends well. I wasn't really a great friend, during puberty, which I mean, how many young teen girls are, right? Like I just didn't have the tools. My system needed support. And so to heal that, it required my family and my close friends to just keep showing up. But really, I healed it when I met this work where I could love freely and not change who I am to be in relationship with people. And like, I wasn't attracted to drama all of a sudden, right? Like a lot of times when you constantly are attracted to something like that's not good for you, it might be because of your attachment style. It might also be because you have really sucky boundaries and you may not know how to protect your heart. So those two things really do work very closely together.
So how do you heal those boundaries or heal those attachments if you're insecurely attached? Like how would one go about undoing that and becoming securely attached?
Right. So I think when we talk about healing attachment, it really starts with being able to know oneself, right? And to take those deep dives to understand why you show up the way you do, right? Like what makes Bridget tick, what makes Elle tick. I think that's really the beginning of healing any issues with attachment, whether you're an avoidant, an insecure, reactive, like all of these things, like these are all these very psych phrases. But really, if we can take a step back and do some like inner work just to get to know, like, do I really like coffee? Or is it because coffee reminds me of my dad? Right? Like asking those tough questions is sometimes important because I'm happy, right? Pharrell. It's my song. Coffee does make me happy. But it really reminds me of my daddy. And so like for me, coffee is like, it's a comfort food. Like it's something that I don't want to do without. And I probably consume way too much.
Me too.
But it's part of my healing journey to recognize that sometimes I just want to sip my coffee in a big old mug because it reminds me of time with my dad.
Well, do you have anything else that you want to add before we close out?
I think one of the questions that I kind of like did not address that you asked was what are some of the things we can do to support ourselves when healing from trauma? And I wanted to make sure that I mentioned those things. And so in my practice, we talk about these 5 pillars of health. So I've sort of integrated health promotion and education with this read. So I want to make sure we talk about sleep hygiene, making sure that we get at least 8 hours of sleep every night, that we're turning down at least an hour from all technology and all screens, that we're not having caffeine or any stimulants right before bed, that we implement things that support quality sleep. That's the first one. I think that's probably the most important. And especially like young adults and then like the crazy moms in my age group who are always running around with their children and other people, like those are some of the things that really suffer. It's one of the first things that'll suffer if you don't pay attention, right? So that one's really, really important. Now, what's my other favorite one, Elle?
Running, physical
Activity. You remember that? That's one of my favorites, like any intentional movement. So like I think that getting in the pattern of regular exercise is one of the most transformational things we can do when we're working through trauma, or maybe just wanting to show up as our best selves, right? Because any physical activity is going to allow us to have an increased endorphin. It's going to allow us to balance all of those neurotransmitters. Now, one of the very best activities is walking.
That's my favorite one. I was hoping that was going to be
Yes.
there.
Walking is like one of the very best for longevity. And it's something that in many, many cultures, after a meal, it's like a mandatory thing where people go out for a 10 to 15-minute walk after every meal. I wish we did that in the United States.
Me and my best friend Cameron actually would like start going on walks after like every single meal we would eat together, just because I feel like it would make more sense.
It does. And it's just like, it allows you to kind of like have those intimate conversations, like one-on-one with your friend, with your partner, with God.
Especially being in nature.
Yes. And actually, there's studies that show if you walk around any body of water, that your neurotransmitters will modulate faster. So, like, even the retention pond in the back of your neighborhood.
Yeah. Even the
A little coulee. If you live by the bayou, go ahead, take a walk. You know, those things are important. I bet it would even work like little water features in your backyard.
Probably
I think it would work. I think it would work. Okay, so we talked about the intentional movement. Then these are some of the more boring ones that people just don't like to talk about, but elimination patterns, right? Like, you gotta poop, guys. It's super important. Like, poop health is one of the most important things we can do for our body.
It's so true. Like gut health, not having good gut health.
So important.
Just like my knowledge of gut health, I feel like is finally like starting to understand it a little bit more, because like I am trying to heal my gut with like chicken broth, or is it bone, not chicken?
Yes, bone
broth and stuff, and like just eating like healthier like fruits and stuff, because I know that's a whole thing, but yeah, I don't know enough about it. So please educate us.
Yeah. Well, we should definitely poop every day. Many, many women, especially, like, suffer with chronic constipation because of our hormone fluctuations. So I'm going to tap on that one, as in everyone poop every single day. And if you're not pooping every day, figure out why. And it's probably because of the next one, which is hydration. And that's one that I always like to hit on, especially in the South, where we sip coffee and drink alcohol all the time. These things really like can counteract what we drink during the day. Like, those substances are not, it's not the same as water, guys.
No.
It's not the same as water. Even though Uncle T. Joe sips his beer all day long, it does not mean that that liquid has enough water in it to deal with the alcohol.
Exactly.
It's not good.
The vitamins that the water has.
It's not as good. Your cells are going to freak out. You're actually increasing the toxic load and making your liver work really, really hard. So we should just do better.
Right.
We should just do better. And then the other one you touched on is nutrition, right? Like, we should really be getting a minimum of 5 servings of vegetables and fruits every single day. If we are eating enough vegetables every day, then we're going to poop.
Yeah, I don't think I'm eating enough.
It's 5 a day.
I don't think I have 5 servings of vegetables a day.
I have to be honest. I probably don't either.
Okay.
I have to be perfectly honest. And let me tell you my little biohack. I buy Primal Greens, or the athletic greens, and I drink it. So I drink my vegetables a day. It's not the same, but it's better than nothing. Right? So, as you move through this life journey and you're just trying to support yourself to be the best version, like, you figure out these ways that you can kind of skirt the system a little bit and still support your body. Mm-hmm. So we talked hydration, we talked nutrition, we talked elimination, we talked sleep hygiene, and what was the intentional movement? Yes, we have to move our bodies. Our bodies learn through movement. So those are the big 5 pillars that we can take home without getting on YouTube, which I highly, highly encourage everyone to go to the Mascotova YouTube channel and use those YouTube videos. It is the best resource that we have out there to support neurodevelopment. But those are the 5 pillars of health that I use in my practice. And I think everyone can benefit from those.
I think everyone can benefit from those as well, because I've also touched upon the 5 pillars in another episode, Beyond the Barbell with Jace Lopez. If you haven't checked that one out, you should. But thank you so much for coming on. I learned a lot, as I always do. She's one of my favorite people. She always puts a smile on my face every single time I see her. And so thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for doing this and getting more information out there so young people can pay attention to health and wellness. So thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. So make sure y'all like, subscribe, comment. New episodes every Friday. And with that, stay sexy, stay savage, and stay tuned for another episode of What the L every Friday. Love you. Bye.